Welcome to this seminar, Dry Regions, Shared Water Challenges, Shared Water Solutions. Welcome everybody. I can't see how many participants we have now, but I think there could be a potential that we would have people from at least 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 continents, making this event a true global event. And maybe before we start, just a little bit of background, how on earth this came about. I was working in South Africa as a water sector counselor at the Danish Embassy in Pretoria, and suddenly I got this team calls from a woman from San Diego. She presented herself and introduced herself as Vice President Development for the San Diego Water Technology Alliance. And we started to talk. She had an interface with the Danish Water Tech Alliance in South Africa and or in California. And she wanted to expand that, and we started talking, and very quickly we got to the conclusion that there would be a need to share experiences, to share solutions between the dry regions. And why not start with California and South Africa? And since then, I've actually moved to Kenya. And I must say, I also have to extend a very, very warm thank to this force of nature, the VP of San Diego Water Technology, Gabriel Schubert, who has been the driving force behind this event that she has allowed me to moderate. So thanks a lot for that. Also thanks to the Danish Water Technology Alliance for their support. And of course, thanks to all the speakers and panelists that has signed up. But I think why is this relevant? Why is this relevant? And now I am in East Africa, and of course I have that perspective, and I just came out of a water expert dialogue, and there I heard the heartbreaking story about the city of Baidoa in Somalia. And basically in 2011 there were 230,000 people in Baidoa. Now there is 787,000 people in Baidoa. The water supply that they have is 100% groundwater based. It's in the central part of Somalia. It's 100% groundwater based. And basically they can only in the dry season produce enough water to supply approximately 7 liters per capita per day. And we all need that. The most basic is actually 30 liters to keep yourself clean, to cook and to drink. And there we are not even including livestock. So there is an enormous need for solutions, both in terms of national planning, national management, local solutions, understanding the water resource, mapping the water resource, effective operations, effective context-ready and cultural-ready technology, and of course, governance solutions. So there is an enormous need for solutions all around the world. The challenges in California are equally grave, of a completely different nature. The challenges in South Africa are equally grave, but of a completely different nature. And even in Denmark, we are not out of the woods yet, and we will hear more about that a little bit later. I once heard a colleague say, we need African solutions for Africa. I don't believe in that. I think what we have to ensure is to get global access to the best available solutions. So if the best solution is African, I would very much like that California and Denmark also has access to that. If the best solution comes from Arizona or from California, I would love the whole world to have access to applying that. And of course, also, if the best solution is Danish, I would also very much like everybody to have access to that. And that, I think, is the main purpose of a workshop, a seminar like this, is to ensure that there is knowledge and understanding and access to these best available solutions. This is, for me, what international cooperation is all about. Yeah. So I think without further ado, I think we have a very, very strong line of presenters, keynotes, and panelists. So without further ado, I will actually start in all modesty to give the floor to my good colleague, Dr. Dirk Müller, who has been my good colleague, and we cooperated closely on the work, some of the work that we did in South Africa, to give him just an introduction to the work that we did, and probably also a little bit about, the challenges that we are seeing in Denmark. Dirk, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. Thank you for the great outlook you have and the way you are providing information and making use of that on a very holistic view. So the presentation I'd like to present to you is about making Danish expert knowledge available for our cooperation that we have with South Africa, what we call a sector cooperation on water, and that started back in 2015. Well, it's all about, or very much it's about the knowledge that we have, the experience that we gathered from, among others, groundwater mapping in Denmark. In Denmark, where the national water supply is entirely based on groundwater, standardized data collection procedures and public databases have been developed to enable the sustainable abstraction of and protection of our drinking water for quite some time. In 1998, the Danish government adopted a program with the aim to map the location of the Danish aquifers, the extent of their distribution and interconnection, as well as to identify particularly areas that are vulnerable with respect to nitrogen leaching, which was a big issue back in those days. This has led to the implementation of some of the most comprehensive groundwater mapping, monitoring, and protection programs, we would say, in the world. The program has laid the foundation for Danish expertise within groundwater management, where registration and databases, surveying technologies, software tools for integrated water resource modeling, and decision-making systems remain essential to sustainable management. Since 1999, Denmark has spent more than $400 million on mapping of 30% of the country to identify focus areas with respect to existing and future drinking water interests, and to identify catchment areas to utility, as well as zones with regard to potential nitrogen leaching to groundwater. Groundwater mapping is based on the interpretation of data that has been collected before we started mapping, that are available from the start of the program, and that might be combined with additional data that will be collected as part of the mapping to identify the spatial distribution of aquifers and protective clay covers layers over aquifers. This involves the interpretation of geological information from boreholes, geophysical surveys, measurements, and groundwater chemistry, as well as hydrogeological conditions, for example, on groundwater formation and groundwater flow systems. There are a large number of particularly geophysical methods that have been developed during the last 20 years as part of the national mapping program, and combined with information from borehole drilling, provided basic data to establish geological and hydrological models. The geological models are applied to identify the location, size, and geological protection of aquifers, as well as flow structures. So I now try to present some of the pilot projects that we had, where we try to make use of the knowledge that we have both from Denmark and South Africa as to mapping of groundwater aquifers. As part of the cooperation between Denmark and South Africa, we have established a number of activities. This is just one. It's about the SAGMA project, which is the South African version of a groundwater mapping and assessment approach. The objective of the SAGMA project was to analyze the extent to which elements from the Danish groundwater mapping approach can be adapted to South African conditions. So the project included a description of the approaches currently used in Denmark and in South Africa, respectively, as well as an identification of key factors of the two approaches, and followed by recommendations from the project. The table shown here provides an overview about the suggestions as to which mapping components to consider depending on geological complexity in the respective areas. In South Africa, even large metropoles like Cape Town have challenges supplying sufficient water. To secure a reliable water supply for the future, the Saldanha Bay community, which is located north of Cape Town, has taken several strides towards incorporating groundwater into their supply mix. The search for and use of groundwater resources has often been hindered by the fact that most of the South African groundwater is stored in fractures in the bedrock, which it makes it difficult to both map and reach it. To sustainably manage groundwater resources in combination with existing water supply sources while protecting at the same time the Saldanha Bay area ecosystem, the municipality is aware that German data is the basis for all decisions. To obtain knowledge about the geology and groundwater resources in finer detail, they engaged groundwater mapping experts from Denmark to survey and provide 3D mapping of a 2,400 square kilometer large area. The SkyTEM South Africa performed the data collection, employing its airborne electromagnetic geophysical method. Data were analyzed and modeled to locate groundwater resources and inform the management of these resources in order to provide them the necessary background to making sustainable decisions. Well, the Saldanha Bay has also been chosen for another pilot study to establish a well feed management system to support conjunctive use of different sources. That is both with respect to or including groundwater, surface water, desalination, and managed aquifer recharge to ensure the most robust and sustainable water supply. The well feed protection has been structured around 4 main activities. First, the development of operational rules, that is, how the different water sources can be mixed at a specific area in conjunctive use. Then the development of a water manager software system, enabling it to manage real-time and manually collected data from multiple data points by integrating the developed operational rules. Then development of a geological and a hydrological model for the Saldanha Bay area based on the approach used in the Danish groundwater mapping program. And finally, not to forget, capacity building with face-to-face workshop on the final water supply management system in South Africa. Many of the tools that have been developed and guidelines as well will now be implemented as part of the South African legislation. And we're hoping for, by that, ensuring that, as Jørgen states from the very beginning, to make use of the best management practices from both countries. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences from Denmark, and also sharing some of the experiences and some of the work that we did in South Africa. And I think, you know, one of the things that I also think is a global challenge is actually having the full understanding of the groundwater resource. Of course, you can have patchy understandings, but having the full understanding is definitely a huge challenge. So thank you very much for I'll just start the video. Sorry. Thank you very much for giving us shedding a little bit light on how that can be done. But without further ado, we will move now into the keynotes, and I would like to give the floor to Dr. Famiglietti, Global Futures Professor from Arizona State University, and has participated in a long list of central initiatives, the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative, He's Executive Director Emeritus Global Institute for Water Security, former NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory Senior Water Scientist, and has been in this business for many, many years. Jay will give us a keynote under the title of Groundwater Deficit Challenges in the Southwest USA and South Africa, an overview of the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative. Over to you, Jay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jorgen. Can everyone see, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. So thanks, really a pleasure. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you may be. Happy to give this presentation and to be sharing methods and best practices around the world. I think that's exactly what we need to do. So I'll talk about three things. How we observe freshwater storage changes from space, and then I'll get into some of our work on regional studies of groundwater depletion, and then show a few slides on the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative. I'll move along at a pretty good clip because basically trying to give two talks for the price of one. And so the satellite that we have been working with for the longest time is called GRACE, NASA satellite, Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment. And the follow-on mission, which is essentially the same thing, launched in 2018. Without going into too much detail, GRACE really maps the time variations in Earth's gravity field. And so these two satellites fly in a tandem orbit. They're not very big. They're about 1 meter tall by 2 meters wide by 3 meters long. They're up about 400 kilometers and they're separated by about 200 kilometers. They orbit over the poles, and so as they sweep over the Earth, they actually respond to how much mass, water mass, is the biggest thing that changes in the timescales that GRACE is functioning. As they encounter more or less water mass on the ground, say because of a flood or a long-term drought like we're having in the Southwest, the gravitational tug on the satellites is more or less, and it pulls the satellites up or down. And so we map those with incredible accuracy, sub-micron level, the position of the satellites. And from that, we're able to map out regions of the Earth that are gaining or losing water storage on a monthly basis. We're talking about the change in the total water storage, all of the soil moisture, snow, surface water, groundwater together. So to get at groundwater, we have to do more work, which I'll show you. And it functions at longer time scales and larger spatial scales. So it's not like a meteorological satellite that's going to tell us what's happening in downtown Phoenix, but it is going to tell us, since we're in Arizona, what's happening. And if you chop up Arizona into a dozen or so boxes, it'll tell us sort of about that scale. And we're working on increasing that resolution. One of the biggest products that comes out is this map of changing freshwater availability. And the reds are shown. So these are trends in total water storage. All of the snow, surface water, soil moisture, groundwater, ice. So reds are losing and blues are gaining, and there's a real structure here. But let me go through some of the hot spots. So we know the ice sheets are melting away, Greenland, Antarctica. We also have our glaciers and ice caps that are melting away. We've got these broad climate patterns of high latitude precipitation increase and low latitude precipitation increase. And mid-latitude drying, that's very much IPCC type stuff but we're seeing it now rather than the end of the century. More recently, we're seeing a lot of drying and melting in Canada, where I'm sitting right now. I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, just about to move our house starting tomorrow, and high latitude melting across Eurasia. That's recent. That's over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, that was all blue in our maps. So that's a little bit scary. We're starting to see the extremes of flooding and drought appear in these maps, and the world's major aquifers are being rapidly depleted. And so this is something that I've worked on for quite a long time. If you take this map and map it to a map of the world's major aquifers, we see that almost half of them are past sustainability tipping points. So not good news. We're focused on Arizona, which I'll show you in a little bit these days. And they also have some slides on South Africa and, Libya and the Northwestern Sahara aquifer system. I think the flooding that's happening right now and all the deaths that are resulting from the flooding are, an indication of the challenges we have in water management. going from the very dry to the very wet. In fact, we experienced the same thing in California last winter. So some of these regional studies of groundwater depletion, Grace is telling us the change in this. This could be a big basin. So all of the snow and the surface water and the soil moisture and the groundwater. And so we know that the change in land is equal to the sum of these component changes. So, about 20 years ago, I had the brilliant idea of rearranging the equation and saying, hey, we could solve for groundwater storage. We have Grace, and if we have other data for snow and surface water and soil moisture, and that may vary depending on where you are. If you're in Arizona or California, you've got really great data. You can use a lot of ground-based observations. If you're trying to do a study in Syria, which we've done, then you have to rely more on computer models and other satellites to put these data sets together. So to get to our groundwater, we've got this from Grace, the change in storage from land. If we want to isolate the groundwater storage change, then we have to remove that signal, that mass change signal above the water table. So, just some snapshots of some work that we've done and time series over here on the right side of the monthly variations, and just sort of red colors from animations that we've done that have shown the sort of cumulative changes in these regions. By the way, we're updating all of these things and nothing has gotten better. There's no improvement. Here's an animation. I think it becomes very, very helpful. And when we work with decision makers and with the general public, this sort of stuff is very, you'll see we're going to go into a dry period here in California. We're looking at the Central Valley, this profoundly important agriculture region. We're going to go into a big dry, and it gets so red and black towards the end that people want to cry when they see it. And so I think that's a good thing in terms of helping to make the invisible visible when it comes to groundwater storage changes. This is the update that we did our California study. So what we're looking at is long-term depletion of groundwater, cumulative groundwater storage changes in the Central Valley, shown in green there in California. The colors in the background are whether or not it's a very dry period, tan, or a very wet period, shown in blue, or moderately wet or moderately dry in the light blue and the light tan. The red are data, we're going back to 1960, actually 1962. The red data are USGS data combined with observations, and the blue data are our Grace data. And so, you see a few things. Obviously, the downward trend, the tremendous amount of groundwater depletion. Every time we write a paper, we sort of relate it to how many lake meads of groundwater we burned through. At this point, it's probably about 3. But you also see that we don't really get a heck of a lot of recharge in those wet periods, and that the dry periods, this is an agricultural region, and so farmers hit the groundwater really, really hard. The third thing we see is that if you look at the blue, it sort of falls below that black trend line, and that's an acceleration. So there's been an acceleration. This was the paper we published just before Christmas. So an acceleration of groundwater depletion in California, which is bad because this is at the same time we're actually beginning to implement the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So perhaps this is just human nature to use more water before the real constraints kick in. In Arizona, we wrote a similar paper back in 2014, and we're updating it now. I'll show you some of those updates. So we're looking at the entire Colorado River Basin. And Arizona is really the most of the lower basin. So here's our Grace time series for, this is like 2005 to 2014. So, seasonal variations put a downward trend. And what we wanted to look at was the difference between surface water, particularly in Lake Powell and Lake Mead, that everybody pays attention to, and the groundwater that nobody pays attention to. And so what we see that certainly, there's drops here in Lake Powell and Lake Mead shown in red, but that the groundwater at this point in time was disappearing at a rate of about 6 or 7 to 1. And so that's an important message. And as Paul can attest to, most of the groundwater in Arizona is not managed. So it's not really a surprise. Here's some updates. So these are like first results. So we're looking now just at Arizona, the ups and downs in the time series. We've got these dry periods. We're able to map out, these periods of depletion. We're over here right now. We're probably about here right now, actually. So we're able to map out spatially what's going on. And so the reds these are like the trends that have happened over that time period. And the reds again are losing and the blues are gaining. So we can start to get a little bit more of a picture, but we need to do better. And so this is where we're headed. So this is where we're at right now with Grace data in Arizona, but we've got a bunch of ground-based observations. We've got all kinds of new satellites. That's the soil moisture satellite. That's the evapotranspiration satellite. That's the surface water satellite. This is the snow, airborne snow observatory. And if we can put those all together, which we're trying to do in my group, that we should be able to do best available maps of groundwater storage changes for whatever template we want. It could be subbasins, it could be water, groundwater districts. So we're working on that, and you can see we already have a big improvement in resolution from left to right. But that's work in progress. There was discussion of the Southwest. There's the Southwestern U.S., and so here's a time series. So what I just talked about in Arizona and California is really all across the Southwest. And then while we were talking at the beginning here, I just pulled off some data for Denmark, where you see the ups and downs and the downward trend, but South Africa, which has a completely different signal. And my understanding in South Africa was really one where, it's a question of really not having enough reservoir storage development, and not enough, the reservoirs are small and the groundwater is not really developed. So those are things that we can talk about. So yeah, it's a big issue, right? In finally getting attention in the United States. I mean, I've been banging my head against the wall for the longest time. So it was great to see this article come out in the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago. But the rapid pace and global scale at which groundwater availability is changing has really outstripped the pace and the scale of society's collective response. So one response Arizona's had is the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative. And this is something that launched just before I arrived, basically on January 1st of this year. And we are going like heck to try to get this thing going on. And so you're going to hear about some of Paul's work. The overall vision is really water security for a thriving Arizona. And let's make no bones about it. Water is really the key for growth drives the economy, and water drives growth in Arizona and our desert cities. And so issues like groundwater, its disappearance is really literally, not being overly dramatic, it's really an existential threat to desert cities like Phoenix. So our mission is really to work towards a driving and thriving water future through discovery, innovation, and action for the benefit of all of Arizona. So we're trying to accelerate the things that we're doing, what Paul's doing, what I'm doing, what our colleagues in law and policy and management are doing. We've got technological developments, we've got applied research, we've got partnerships that we're actively working on. And project like this, it's really all about deep engagement, co-developed research, simultaneously raising public awareness, taking advantage of this moment in time in Arizona where we have a fair amount of funding, where we have a very much a pro-water and a pro-groundwater governor, and a bunch of really engaged researchers like Paul and myself. So the innovation has what we call 4 pillars. Paul's going to talk about the Global Center for Water Technology. I've been involved with Enrique Vivoni in the Advanced Water Observatory decision support system. We have something we call Impact Arizona, really doing the engagement and understanding. And Arizona Water for All, really looking at getting water into insecure households. And we're going to, this is the latest thing, and this is something that I'll be leading, is an Arizona Water Integrated Assessment, where we really try to understand, hey, how much water do we have in Arizona? How much of it's surface water? How much is groundwater? How much do we need? What are we using it for? How are those changing over time? And trying to bring it down, trying to bring those answers down, so do it for the whole state, using integrated models and remote sensing and data on the ground, to really bring it down to the scale at which water management decisions are made. Those could be sub-basins for groundwater, they could be water districts. And so that's just getting launched. Here's some of our personnel. So I'm here and Paul is here. So one thing that I'm involved with with Enrique Vivoni is more of a forecasting thing, really building on our strength in modeling, in remote sensing, and doing better forecasting and prediction. Sarah Kyle, so I'm not going to talk about all the pillars, just a couple more and then pass it over to Paul. So Sarah Kyle at the Porter Center is working on science-driven, with Catherine Sorensen is working on science-driven policy. And really, she's quite well connected in our state. And Paul is director of the Global Center for Water Technology. And I might as well let Paul, I'll just segue into my introduction to Paul. And so Paul Westerhoff joins us now with his presentation. Paul is a Regents Professor in the Fulton School of Environmental Engineering and the Built Environment. He's director of the Global Center of Water Tech, which he's going to talk about. And he is a recently elected member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering. So over to you, Paul.
Great. Thanks, Jay. That was a perfect lead in. Let me bring up my slides here. Right. Does that look good, Jay? Thumbs up? Okay, great. So, Jay talked about, how much water is there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what people do with the water in terms of using it and for kind of fit for purpose applications and how water quality is really important. Okay. So, here's Arizona, right? If you haven't visited us, we're known for kind of the Grand Canyon. And I'm going to talk mostly about this center in the bottom right, this Global Center for Water Technology. But I've also, I have leadership roles in these other National Science Foundation and NIH centers, which really all focus about what's in the water compared to how much water we might have. So it's a good complement. And we have some really good relationships with a whole number of different countries in Africa. The most prominent one is really at UNISA. They have an iNano for Water Center. And there's been a lot of development and interest by the National Science Foundation strengthening kind of the expertise between all the African countries and the United States on water energy topics. We're going to be funding a series, the National Science Foundation is going to be funding a series of really engagement workshops around sustainable resources. And when I visit UNISA, I think there's some interesting lessons. I kind of agree with the statement earlier about, African solutions, and some of them are well suited. But, I think we can learn from them and they can learn from us. And I think when I've been there, they really convinced me of the importance of working with industry and, pretty large industry that drives economies. And so I think there's a lot of shared conceptual understanding around what these companies and their role in kind of water and water budgets. So, everything's always bad. Otherwise, we don't talk about it. This is Lake Mead and the Colorado River system, as Jay talked about, is really, under stress. But sometimes these opportunities exist, when there's a crisis. And that's kind of the, pattern for Arizona is either we're in a drought or we're not. But this goes back, to thousands of years ago, and really all Arizonans have always been really innovative. These are the Hohokam Indians, on the land that Arizona State University is now occupied, and they use stone tools and wooden tools to dig canals. So they were doing technology to manage water long before Phoenix rose from the desert. And as Jay said, this center, this Arizona Water Innovation Center, has these 4 pillars. And it was really kind of a partnership between our president, the governor of our state, and federal recovery money that was the impetus for this. Really, thinking about how to integrate 4 important pillars. The one that I'm going to talk about today is this Global Center for Water Technology, where our kind of vision and mission are stated here, but it's really to provide innovative technologies that'll improve kind of fit for purpose water quality. That is, meet the right water quality for the right application. So the water we use in semiconductors are not the same water we need to use in our house, for example, and produce or make an additional 250,000 acre feet of sustainable water available in a decade. Now, how do you make water? Well, you can physically make it by things like atmospheric water capture. You can access groundwater that might be polluted and not being used if it's in a sustainable basin. And we're really going to focus on solutions, because some of the key performance indicators for our center is not how great we are, but really, what do we do to move the dial? And in our center, it's really around how many startup companies, how many patents, how much venture capital. Literally, those are the metrics that the governor's office are using for our part of this overall institute. And as Jay said, each of us have been developing roadmaps, and Jay's going to kind of look at helping integrate them. We develop a technology roadmap that looks at everything from importing water from the Gulf of California, hundreds of miles across, another country. But these options are also, I think, representative of potential large-scale projects that the African continent might look at. But a lot of them, you'll see in a minute, are more technology-based. So our overall center has a kind of a leadership group. We've developed technology roadmaps over the first half of this year that are really mapping to the type of kind of early stage research that universities, faculty do. But really, at the same time, we've been developing some demonstration test beds that I'll talk about in a little bit that use kind of existing technology and emerging technology rather than really first early stage technology. And then, of course, workforce development, because we need people who understand how to responsibly develop and use these waters. And then again, startups. And so we have a whole constellation of federal, local, and private companies that are part of this ecosystem. And they were all participating in our stakeholder groups. So far, we've done 4 of the 6 roadmaps that we want. And the first is water importation to Arizona. So this is from the Gulf of California, but also the Mississippi River, the Columbia River, or the Great Lakes. And these are all kind of on the books, and people have estimates for the cost of this water, and it's really expensive water, but it's very high quality potentially, and could serve to provide a long-term water supply. I think there's a lot of debate whether we should import more water and what some of those challenges would be. But then there's some very specific, opportunities and challenges. In the United States, there's something called a CHIPS Act related to bringing manufacturing of computer chips and semiconductors back into the United States. And that's been very successful and very helpful in the economy of Arizona. But there's a lot of debate about the water use in these. So one fab might use the same amount of water as about 22,000 homes, for example. And so what does that mean if they're good stewards of the water in terms of reusing the water? And what does that mean for the people coming? There's 22,000 homes need water. But here we're really focused on the very high quality water that these fabs need, and the fact that they produce a lot of water that can be reused, and really trying to push the innovation of them reusing that water to put it back on a chip. There's a lot of groundwater in Arizona, but not all of it's easy to access, and not all of it's of high quality. So a lot of it is very salty. And that's really limited the development of even mining more of the water that Jay worries about. But it is one of the resources that we have to fill these long-term gaps. So what is a sustainable way to desalinate that groundwater and maximize its use? Then there's particular things in the groundwater in the urban areas. One of them is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, Teflon-like stuff that has contaminated a lot of water, and a lot of cities have had to turn off their wells. So looking specifically at that. And then we're looking at really 22nd century food and agricultural production. This isn't how to make drip irrigation better, but really what happens as you look at hydroponics, or maybe other ways of making food, alternative proteins and things that are really maybe have a very significantly different water footprint that we should be thinking about. And then Arizona has a lot of rural water challenges in private wells, and so we're looking at developing novel technologies for them. We scale these up. The roadmaps feed the needs for early phase research, goes up to test beds, these demonstration scale facilities, and we implement this with a whole range of different partners. So some of the demonstration scale facilities that we've started are listed here. The priority was really the semiconductor and industrial reuse. So this isn't just semiconductors, but places like PepsiCo that make water, in Arizona and put it in a bottle, all the way to, battery companies and a whole, network in between. We've created the first national atmospheric water extraction test bed here in Arizona. It's actually kind of been here for 2 years, but it was really when we engaged with DARPA, kind of a forward-looking part of the government related to the Department of Defense, that they really thought that this was needed, and we've kind of built it up since then. And we also have a rural and home point of use treatment system. A lot of people in their homes put in under the sink reverse osmosis systems, very inefficient because they're unhappy with the quality of the water. And this rural and home point of use connects back to our experiences in Africa, where we've been taking some of the same technology here for private homes and starting to implement it at very rural schools in Africa. But we've been learning from them about the significance of using local resources. So they have something called the mahunga tree, for example. And so we can make activated carbon out of this mahunga tree, which has kind of deep spiritual and healing applications. So I think there's ways to merge the cultures and technology. And you can see some of the other things that we'll be starting. So with that, we were trying to put in lots of things. I'll just end on this slide. But, part of this and this whole center is about innovation. This is a startup company that we have, and we're really trying to push this idea of innovation in the water sector. This is on optical fibers to control biofilms, kind of down in the weed types of things. But it's the potential to really, transform, moving away from chemical intensive water treatment processes to water treatment processes driven by light and electricity rather than chemicals and sludges. So with that, I'll end it and hand it back over to our moderators.
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much, Paul. It has really been enriching. I think, Paul, you gave fantastic examples of how you can turn hardcore Earth observation data and innovative algorithms into very, very scary and informative graphics that can be understood by even politicians. So I think that was absolutely fantastic. I think also you alluded to the fact that the combination of government-led strong programs in combination with very, very strong capacitated centers of excellence like your university is definitely a way forward to get an in-depth understanding of your water resource and also an in-depth understanding of the other opportunities that you have with water. I think that's basically where you took over, Paul. How can you turn your challenge into your advantage? And I think that's what you're doing. And I think also thank you very much for making connections to the historical facts and the long-term traditions in North America, but also in Africa. Using the mahunga tree to make activated coal. But I think all this is a very, very good kickstart of our panel discussion. We have a very strong lineup of panelists here. Unfortunately, one, Dr. Morgan Padayati, had to bail out because of family issues. But we have a very strong lineup, and that'll give us a little bit more time for the discussions afterwards. And for the participants, there will be a chance to interact. There will be a chance to put questions to the panelists and also to the keynote. I have definitely a number of questions already on the tip of my tongue. But let's do that after we've given the panelists a chance just to pitch from their perspective. And allow me first to introduce Dr. Diego Rodriguez, lead water economist, Southern and Eastern Africa. I think he's responsible for 7 countries, headquartered in Pretoria. And And Diego, you know, looking at the World Bank perspective, you really have a big hand in a lot of water-related programs, especially in the developing world. Have you, in your work and the World Bank's work, have you seen, you know, really good solutions? And have you seen good solutions that has taken off, and also good solutions that have taken off beyond the areas where, or the regions where they have been demonstrated? Diego, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jorgen. Can you hear me well?
We hear you well.
Excellent, and many thanks also for the invitation and for the fantastic introductory remarks. I think that, yes, as you mentioned, I work in around 14 countries in the region, and we are working in some of the most sort of water scarce countries. Now I'm based here in Pretoria, but I do a lot of work in Namibia, in Botswana, Lesotho, and also countries that are experiencing, and obviously South Africa, sort of drying conditions, and these drying conditions are starting to become sort of more chronic, you know, as we look at more arid areas. You know, we are doing some work on South Africa on the climate side, and it's basically the country in the world that is sort of warming at the highest or the fastest rate. You have Namibia, sort of one of the most water scarce countries in the world, highly dependent on groundwater for its water in the area of Windhoek, for the capital city. And what we are seeing is also that these increasing challenges have a lot to do with a lot of the things that were presented here, no? And that we do a lot of our work in trying to bring those experiences and those technologies and those approaches that worked in places like the Western US, or whether it's Spain or Portugal, that have, you know, extensive experience in addressing some of the water insecurity, I would say, or the dry conditions, and how they can be sort of customized or adapted to the limitations and the constraints that we have in our region. So just to give a bit of context on a couple of issues that I think are quite pertinent. The first one is sort of I think the institutional lack of capacity that we face in the region. No? There is massive sort of institutional fragmentation, and when we look at potential stress factors or shock factors, you know, and being climate variability or climate change, you see that there is a lot of sort of disconnect between the major economic sectors, being water or energy or agriculture. There's a lack of incentives to cooperate and collaborate and exchange data and information. No, information is power, and you see that the incentives are not there to start and promote further collaboration, particularly to understand how information and data can be used for decision making when you are facing some of these conditions. You know, what is the cost of inaction, of not addressing some of these issues in terms of job losses or GDP, and that institutional coordination is usually lacking. And I think even when we come and we start a discussion on bringing some of these technologies or methods or approaches to some of these countries, the main issue that we say is, okay, let's try to understand what is your institutional setup, what kind of capacities you have in-house. And I'll give you a very clear example now that we are working in Botswana in trying to prioritize a series of sort of water resilient investments based on the scarcity conditions in the country. And one of the main issues is that, of course, on the books, they have a very clear plans on expansion and exploitation and further management of groundwater, but without really understanding how much they have in terms of availability. They have some notion that some of these aquifers are, they have significant saline intrusion, but in the meantime, they just keep on exploiting the resource without due consideration to the sustainability of the aquifers. But at the same time, they are really in this sort of scarcity conditions are giving us a great opportunity to engage with the major economic sectors and come up with a common agenda with a clear understanding that Botswana, or the case of Namibia, for example, the main economic sectors are highly dependent on water. These are mining countries. You have expansions or new plans, for example, in Namibia to expand green hydrogen. You have expansion of lithium mining, all of water-thirsty sectors. And these engagement are giving us the opportunity to really share with major economic sectors to try and come up with a common agenda. Another example is, for example, in Angola, in which we are doing a lot of work in the south of Angola, which is the driest part of the country, in bringing some technologies from the West and adapting them to sort of, or combining them with more indigenous technologies for the whole, for aspects of storage, right? Sort of small dams, sand dams, and what has worked around the world and how we can start using that in implementing some of these projects in our countries. So I think that the push that we have, and I'm glad to see also the strong emphasis on remote sensing, and in Botswana, actually, for the groundwater, we are working now with the European Space Agency precisely to do a groundwater assessment based on what Jay clearly explained. But it's also an understanding that these are countries in which sometimes the lack of institutional capacity and technical capacity and the lack of financial resources do not allow us to spend years in trying to do in situ mapping, and we have to bring all the existing technologies that were developed in the US or in Europe to help make decisions faster and cheaper tools for decision making that can help us address some of these scarcity constraints that we have now. That also includes, for example, in the case of how do we prioritize investments that make sense? You have these national master plans that are running investments, or the bill is in the billions of dollars when the financial constraints are such that you may only have a tenth of the budget to implement. So how can these technologies allow us to prioritize those investments that really make sense and address some of these water security challenges that they are facing? I'll stop there, Jorgen, and I'll be glad to engage later in the conversation, but I don't want to monopolize the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diego. Thank you very much. I think, thank you for alluding to, I think, of course, the need for solutions that work here and now, but of course, at the same time, also the need to have the long-term plans that can ensure that these solutions actually are also sustainable, and also to alluding to, I think, the fairly persistent challenge of lack of institutional capacity, and maybe especially institutional coordination, both nationally but also internationally. Thank you very much, Diego. But let's proceed now and allow me to introduce the next panelist, Dr. Jo Burgess. She's the head of the trial reservoir program in iUtilities. And I had the pleasure of meeting and working with Jo in South Africa. I think you were with the Water Research Commission when we had some interfaces there. So a pleasure to see you again. And Jo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. My name is Jo Burgess. I'm based in South Africa. And as just been said, I used to work at the Water Research Commission. I was there for a decade. And before that, I was an academic, but now I work at our utilities, which is in the private sector. We work across 14 countries around the world, including many of the dry regions that we're talking about today. So the Pacific coastline of the Americas, in North Africa, in the Middle East, the Mediterranean, in Southern Africa, and in the Asia Pacific region. And the part of ISLE that I'm blessed to be working in is the non-commercial part of the company. So although we are for profit, we are a social enterprise, and we put 25% of our profits for 3 years in a row now into the reservoir programs. And these are the programs that I take care of with a small team sort of around the ISLE world. For today's discussion, though, I'm going to depart from the point that was made at the very beginning, that technologies exist, and no matter where they're from, they have merit in the areas where we're all based, where we have shared challenges, shared climatic conditions, shared issues with water scarcity, real and physical water scarcity, but also management issues and issues with a lack of water of the correct quality, even if we have the right volume. All of us are suffering from similar problems, and solutions to these problems very often exist. They need to be demonstrated under local conditions, and this is where the programs that I run come in. It's important to pilot and trial these technologies that have been developed under different sets of working conditions in different places. But in the water industry, we're very risk averse in our utilities, and we run the risk of trialing and trialing again. So the startup companies, the spin-outs and startups and SMMEs that develop these technologies fall into the piloting valley of death, and they die there because they trial and everybody's very interested and they go, oh, that was really good and it worked really well, and where would we use it? But nobody buys anything. And after 50 trials, the company's gone bust. The technology disappears from view. Even if it was an absolutely amazing technology, they cannot sustain themselves when the water sector is satisfying its intellectual curiosity, but not changing what it actually does in business as usual. So the purpose of the reservoirs is to take best practice and turn it into common practice. The way that we do this is on a non-profit basis, so it's purely on a cost recovery basis, because we put our profits into this. And we also have some incredible sponsors like Xylem Innovation Labs, United Utilities, Aqualateral, but some social ventures, great organizations that have seen the merit in this approach. And we support with loan funding to technology developers, trials that are linked to a conditional purchase agreement. What that means is that if the trial succeeds and we help them work out their KPIs of the trial, then the technology developer is guaranteed a sale. This makes the utility do all of its thinking about where would we use it, how would we use it, what questions do we need to ask in order to go, yes, we'll buy this thing. They have to do all that thinking up front. They do the trial, and at the end, if it works, they've already signed a contract that says, the one we tried worked, we'll buy it, or the one that we tried worked, we'll buy 10, or the system that we tried worked, we will subscribe, whatever the business model may be. The really unique thing about the reservoirs programs, though, is that if it doesn't work, there's no obligation on the end user to procure whatever they've trialed. And also there's no obligation on the technology developer to pay us back the money. So we take the financial risk of the trial. If it worked, it was free to the technology user and almost free to the tech developer. Cash depreciates like any other asset, so the interest is linked to inflation only. If it doesn't work, we take the hit, we write off the loan. They don't have to buy anything at the utility, they don't have to pay us back at the tech developer. What this means is that we can support technology developers by providing the funds that they need to run a trial for a specific customer. So they have to have a specific customer in mind. It's not an R&D pilot project. They have to be answering a set of questions for one specific user to be able to say, yes, this does what we want and we'll use it, or no, actually, that's not for us. We've done this 13 times now, and I know a lot of people will now be going, oh, but conditional purchase is really difficult and procurement is really hard. And you're absolutely right. That is the longest lag time. It's the bottleneck in the process, but it can be done. We've done it 13 times over. We have 5 more in the pipeline. If you're a technology seeker or a utility and there's something you want to try, but you don't have funds for a trial, at me. If you're a technology developer, you have somebody who wants to try your technology, but they don't have funds for a trial, at me. We can work out ways to transfer this technology from place to place wherever it's appropriate and take the risk away from you. So I want to hear more about what people are doing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joe. And I think my video now is completely off. I don't know what I look like, so I'll take it off here immediately. But thanks a lot, Joe, to pitching this fantastic modality that the iUtilities are running. And I think it is needed. It is globally needed to have something which is stimulating this really difficult move of technologies coming out of good research, technologies that has been innovated to commercial scale, but something that can ensure that they're actually being absorbed and being applied out there where they are so needed. I would love to talk to you about cheap desalination solutions, but we'll get back to that under the questions. But let me move on to our last panelist and introduce Ms. Elizabeth Lovsted. She is the manager of Integrated Regional Water Resources at the San Diego County Water Authority. Elizabeth, I think, coming from San Diego and being working with the Water Technology Alliance and with the challenges that we have, is Elizabeth with us? I can't see her. Gabe.
I do not see her logged in, so I don't think she's able to make it today.
Okay. So basically, that leaves us a little bit more time for the discussion and for the questions. And I can see in the Q&A and in the chat here, we already have a few. Yeah, that's Gab who has said, please use the Q&A to enter questions for the keynote speakers and the panelists. And I can see here at the Q&A, we have a number of questions already, but I think, yeah, let's do that. Let's have a look what's here. Yeah. There is a question here from Bent Plogstrup. Have the effect from biochar via pyrolysis been in any of the considerations? And I think that was to Paul.
Yeah. I'm not sure what considerations, whether they're the benefits or the potential drawbacks of the pyrolysis process, but, biochar is used in both agriculture, but increasingly also in different types of water treatment because of its ability to both filter and absorb pollutants. So I'm not sure what other effects have been. Do you want to answer or add to the question maybe?
I don't know whether the other participants. Sorry, I don't know whether that.
Maybe they need to type an add-on.
If
question.
Bent would like to go ahead and ask his question or ask a follow-up question, he can do that now.
Bent, do you want to add to your question?
Well, maybe we can move to the next one, then come back. Maybe he's having trouble with this microphone.
Exactly. Yes, I see that, and that's from Gabriel Schubert. Dr. Westerhoff noted Africa convinced him of the importance of working with industry, and the following speaker also noted that. Can collaboration help promote tech trial winners, conditional purposes, and what target implementations where it's most needed? I think there's an amalgamation of two questions from California. Please.
Well, Joe, why don't you go first, Joe, and then maybe I'll add to that.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Paul. Yes, absolutely. Collaboration does help promote, because the way that, or the process we use is that we'll have a three-way conversation with the technology developer and the technology user. And by allaying their concerns about what the critical success factors are of the trial and what the key performance indicators are, we can encourage them to undertake this trial and purchase agreement or conditional purchase agreement. And in fact, in our programs, that's a prerequisite before we will release any loan funding for the trial to take place. So it is fully conditional. If the trial is not a success and the technology doesn't do what they want, then the obligation to purchase falls away. So in that sense, we de-risk the investigation of the technology away from the utility. And that's a response to the risk-averse nature of the technology seekers. So we take that part of the risk away from them. What it means is that when we get to the end of the trial, if it has been a success, then the user undertakes to utilize the technology. And at the conclusion of a successful trial, we then start off on almost a marketing and communications campaign in collaboration with them and the technology developer. And that's because second adopters are really much easier to find in the water industry, but also in adjacent sectors. So the technology developer who's invented the thing and it works and someone's using it can go out and do feature magazines and articles and present at conferences, and people will kind of look at them sideways because they know that they have something to sell. I can go on and do it. I can go and stand on a stage and say, you know, Joe Bloggs invented this amazing thing and somebody used it and they loved it. And people will look at me and go, yeah, okay, but you're a consultant. If I can put the utility or the technology user on a stage next to the technology developer and they're standing literally together on the same virtual or physical platform, and the utility is willing to say, we tried it, we liked it, we bought it. All of the other utilities take that much more seriously. It's a much more compelling story when it's peer-to-peer learning and somebody from water utility municipality A is hearing the story from municipality B. Suddenly the collaboration enables the technology trials that were successful in their reservoir program to find these second adopters, these future customers, much more easily. It lowers the barrier to more uptake, especially if customer A, the first adopter, is willing to have somebody else come and look. And a real world example of this is it happens to be in California. It's a technology called magnetic nanoparticle treatment. And in this particular instance, it was being used to treat irrigation water for production of tree nuts and soft fruits. It has other applications in heavy industry and in potable treatment and all sorts, but the trial was in the agricultural sector. We undertook the trial with one particular agricultural industry stakeholder called Linneman Ranches, and they replaced a two-stage reverse osmosis system with the magnetic nanoparticle system because they were trying to run their water treatment to selectively remove boron, which is quite tricky to do, and also to run it off grid. It has to run from a solar system because it's in central California. It's a long way from on-grid utilities. The system worked. It slashed their energy demand by between 35 and 50% from month to month. It produced the same volume of water at the same quality as they'd been getting from their previous system, which was two-stage RO running on a diesel generator. And they were able to get carbon credits and water credits from their district, which they could then use at other properties that they owned around the site. They were willing to come into a conference with us and with the technology developer, Advantageous Systems, and give a joint presentation. So they tag teamed on the presentation. They also had an open day on their property, and farmers from around Central California came to have a look. The result is that 5 other farms in the area have now put in orders for this particular system. The contracts vary between they want to own the asset outright, they want to lease the asset and have it maintained by ADS. We don't prescribe what the business model should be. It has to suit the technology user and the technology developer. But what it's shown us is that supporting a single trial, putting the technology user and the developer on a stage together, enabling them to showcase what they've done physically, go to a field and go, here's the thing, water goes in, it pumps, it bubbles, water comes out, look at the trees, they're covered in almonds. Convinced 5 other users to say, that's amazing, I want one too. And I think that is the most powerful thing we can do to spread technologies that are good for one particular dry climate into another one. So absolutely, collaboration is a good way to lower the risk and encourage the risk-averse utilities to work together and bring technologies into full-scale implementation, even when they're not that familiar with them.
And Joe, I think that's a great, and maybe I totally agree with everything you said, but I'll take it from the other word of industry, right? You talked about kind of industry in the municipal sector. So I think there's a huge opportunity for, innovation with industrial partners who have very unique challenges. So another example, you were talking about two-phase reverse osmosis. We work with a healthcare company that wants to use two-phase reverse osmosis for home dialysis. To make really clean water. And it's a very different sector, healthcare, clean water, but the innovations for, say, reverse osmosis in the municipal water sector today actually started in the pharmaceutical sector. So I think these other sectors are really, they have other drivers to achieve things like how to remove urea, which is a low molecular weight organic molecule, which has really interesting, challenging things to remove that are the same problem, say, municipal wastewater reuse face. I think the other thing about, industrial partners, that is, for-profit companies that their business is not necessarily water. Most of the Fortune 500 companies have very, very progressive, kind of sustainability goals, SDGs, around energy, but also water. I mean, most of them project they want to be net zero energy and net zero water, whatever that means, by the year 2050. But they are really hungry for things that are innovative. So I think in terms of this question, I think you can look at kind of industries that serve municipal sectors, but really industries that have nothing to do with the municipal sector as well.
Thank you very much. I just saw an add-on from Ben on the biochar, and what Ben was looking at was, can biochar added to the soil, will that reduce reduce the evaporation? Has that been a consideration? I think that's also for you, Paul.
Yeah, I think for sure people have looked at it as a soil amendment. I think if we look to North Africa, they've tried some really, interesting things, and these trials are also going on in California. Instead of biochar, they're putting desiccants. These are like the little white things in your shoes when you buy them to keep the shoe leather dry, but they're putting them into agricultural fields to really absorb moisture out of the air at night and to maintain higher soil moisture in agricultural fields during the day. So biochar can do that to some extent, especially if it's just a sandy soil. But I think there's even more innovation to be had to maintain soil moisture in agricultural fields for sure. Yeah, so I think biochar is just one of those potential solutions.
And there was a question. There was a question a little bit earlier about resources that can be used as far as finding infographics for looking at changing groundwater demand versus the availability. And Joe did put in an answer for that. Jay or Dirk, do you guys have any good resources that you like to use when you're looking at groundwater, and some sources that individuals might be able to use just on their own to go through and look at those things?
So I have my website has a bunch of graphics. It's just my name. It's jfamiglietti.com, and there's a whole graphics page with all kinds of stuff, including some of those animations. You just got to root around and find that stuff.
Yeah.
It might be that we have an English edition of the groundwater mapping, but for sure this is part of the targets that we're approaching. as part of the phase 3 of a sector cooperation, make those methods available to specialists as well as to a certain extent to the public. But it's not currently exist. It doesn't currently exist to what I know of.
And maybe to add to that, Dirk, I think the organization we have in Copenhagen, State of Green, are actually put into the world to compile a lot of these green solutions that are also water related, water resource management, water technology solutions, and they're actually compiling a lot of these solutions and making them available on their website, also in English, so basically globally or most of the world accessible. State of Green, I'll just write it in the chat shortly here.
But that's correct. It also includes the knowledge about groundwater mapping as part of the publications they had on groundwater.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm also sure that the geological survey of Denmark and Greenland, which is basically the ones that are technically heading a lot of the mapping and the modeling of the groundwater resources, there would also be some sources of information there. Yeah. But you know, looking at, you know, just coming out of this IGAT conference that I was sitting in today, I think one of the big gaps there is the in-depth understanding of the resources. So that was one thing, you know, finding ways. And I think the technologies that you mentioned, Jay, remote sensing is definitely a way forward. But I think there's also a huge need to combine the fairly low resolution and not that deep penetrating understanding you can get from Earth's information with something on the ground. So is that something that you are exploring also, Jay? That you know, how can you take in more high resolution, you know, the technologies that Dirk also mentioned, the TEM technologies, electromagnetic. Is that something that you're trying to integrate into the big pictures that you are getting, Jay?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's critical, and I even showed some of that stuff. So, you know, we've taken a few stabs at downscaling using AI. We do a lot of model-based downscaling, but the challenge is to really bring it all together. And so I sort of indicated that's where we want to go in one of my slides. Look, the goal would really be, you know, when it comes to, of course, so we all know when it comes to water use, it's, you know, mostly agriculture that's using the majority of the water that's withdrawn. And at least in the United States, and, you know, definitely in Canada, maybe around the world, a lot of farmers do not really want to share their, you know, their well information, and they're not necessarily required to. So the degree to which we can get down to the farm scale, it could be a big farm, you know, it could be whatever, you know, several kilometers by several kilometers, but the degree to which we could get down to that scale would be really, really important. So there's the more straightforward ways, which are, you know, the stuff that you and I both mentioned. There's the more challenging ways, which are combining with GPS and combining with INSAR. And really not a lot of work has been done. I had a student who tried to tackle that and ended up doing a completely different dissertation. But, you know, I hope to get back to that now that I'm at ASU. So look, it's, I think someone said earlier, a lot of the technology is actually there. And it really requires the manpower to pull it together.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I can see that Elizabeth Lovsted is now with us, and you know, sorry, I saw that you had some, Elizabeth, you had some trouble with the log on, so apologies for that. But I think we should allow Elizabeth to give her pitch. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Lovsted, Manager, Integrated Regional Water Resources from San Diego County Water Authority. Elizabeth, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And, you know, I just apologize for my technical difficulties this morning. Can you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. I'm not sure how to share my screen, so I'm just going to go ahead and talk if that's okay with you guys. I work for the San Diego County Water Authority. We are the regional wholesaler for all of San Diego County, and pretty much supply most of the water to the region. Back in the early 90s, we had about 95% of our water was imported water from Metropolitan Water District. And in the early 90s, we had a drought, and we faced a 30% cut in all of our supplies. And so, and if things hadn't improved, we were going to face a 50% cut in all of our supplies. So after that occurred, there was really a response from the region and said, this can't happen again. We need to make sure that we have a reliable water supply to help our community grow, keep our businesses working, and really safeguard our future. And so since the early 90s, the Water Authority has been working with its 24-member agencies on building a robust portfolio. Today, that portfolio contains mainly water from the Colorado River Water Aqueduct. We've made an agreement with IID, and they conserve water, and we're able to buy that conserved water from them and use that for our service area. We also do rely partly on Metropolitan, but then we also have the largest seawater desalination plant on the west coast of Carlsbad, which gives us about 10% of our water supplies, and really kind of gives us that it's a reliable kind of drought-proof supply. And so all of those things have really helped the Water Authority and its community build its portfolio. In addition to the desalination and water reuse, we have 3 large water reuse projects, one in Oceanside, one in East County, and then a very large one out in, or the city of San Diego is doing. And all 3 of those projects are really going to be water for the future and serve our community by using highly treated wastewater and then putting it through into a reservoir and then using it for potable uses. So last 30 years, we've really invested in making sure that it's reliability for water. In addition to the supplies that have been developed, we've also put a lot of resources into water conservation. Our water use has dropped, per capita water use has dropped between 30 and 40% over the last 30 years. And we've really seen that when we look at kind of what the state is looking for to do a water use efficiency standard. We're looking at a lot of our water suppliers have already made significant investments, and they're already efficient, and they're only going to get more efficient in the future. So with that portfolio that consists of water use efficiency, the desalination plant, looking to a future that includes potable use and recycled water use, San Diego really has reliability moving into the future and moving forward over the next several decades. And
I think we lost Elizabeth there, unfortunately. She was also cutting up a little bit. Yeah, technology sometimes, especially when you want to do global events like this, is a challenge. I think we can take a couple of more questions from the participants here. There's a question from Asger here. I think that's for Dirk. Was the Saldanha Bay exercise a success? Were local stakeholder expectations met in terms of locating accessible groundwater? Was the TEM technology validated on a smaller scale before utilizing the airborne mapping? Dirk, please.
Thank you for the question. I would say regarding the success, it's a question of what was the target. The main aim of the project was to have a pilot study that might be applicable. So it's a test of methods that have been used and developed together with our South African partners, and that we suggest might be used in other areas and in larger areas as well. And that might be elevated also to other pilot projects where financiation is needed. I mean, the success is related to that we developed together with our South African partners methods that is adapted to the South African conditions. We might be better though to include the local participants, but Jörn, you know as much or even more about what you would justify being a success. To my mind, it was a success that we've come so far. Saldanha Bay consists of several modules, you might say, put on each other, and that provides a showcase for South African groundwater management and administration. So the idea is that making those showcases available to administration and the public in order to identify other areas where this will be applied in future as part of the solution with respect to conjunctive use of different sources.
No, definitely, and you know, to my experience, Saldanha Bay was very much driven by the end user, by the Saldanha Bay district municipality. It was, you know, a group of very strong water engineers that, you know, they just wanted the best. They wanted, you know, to understand their water resource. They wanted to diversify from the extraction from the Berg River, and so it was really driven. The whole process was strongly driven by the end user. So I guess there is some sustainability in that. There is time is running here, unfortunately, but we have Carrie Dale wanted to know how collaboration can support aquifer restoration initiative through indirect portable reuse. I don't know who can answer to that. Is that you? Is that Paul? Yes.
I can start, and then maybe Jay can. So yeah, I think aquifer storage and recovery, or you know, in the central Phoenix area, it's a really interesting kind of groundwater managed basin. That is, you can recharge water or wastewater anywhere in the basin, and then like a straw, take it out somewhere else. So you don't actually need to take out the same water that you put in. That's different in other states. And so this works well when you have wastewater, but you know, sometimes communities that have a lot of agriculture don't always have a lot of population or wastewater. But yeah, I think, you know, whether you call it, you know, soil aquifer treatment, aquifer recharge in Arizona, and the, you know, Phoenix area, we use both. And we also do something called Vados injection wells, you know, which we have really sandy, gravelly things. And so it's really easy to, you know, let water, you know, get water into the ground. So I definitely think, and California's seen the same thing. It's a very kind of robust way to level out the supply and demand. Yeah. So we're working with, I'll let Jay go. Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
You have to unmute, Jay.
Oh.
Yeah, so I said we could go on and on this topic.
Yeah, I know.
But it's a good one, and it's important. And Paul, you know, you sort of touched on it, and I think it's a very important. Look, we have to do everything we can. I think it's going to be more important. Well, there's two issues. There's the managed aquifer recharge. Paul, you touched on the using treated wastewater to recharge aquifers. Well, that's always going to be limited by your population and your amount of wastewater. Overall, look, the scope of the problem is huge, and it's bigger than what we're going to get through managed aquifer recharge. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do everything we can. The other thing that I think is critically important, you know, California is a great example. Probably Arizona less so. You know, California, if you go in Southern California, you'll see that like every river is concrete lined. And so, and every floodplain is developed. And so opportunities for natural recharge have really been decreased. So that's a problem. Also, you know, the available rainfall is becoming more episodic. There's more variability. So figuring out ways somehow to capture that increasingly episodic, what we call, just call it stormwater runoff, that we want to capture and use for recharge is really, really important. And there's all kinds of issues with where are you going to do it? Where's the space? You know, agreeing to, you know, getting a city to purchase a recharge, you know, recharge location that's only going to be used episodically and in a way that you can't predict is really, really challenging. But still extremely important.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Jay. I can see that Diego is back here. I think he also had some connectivity problems, but Diego, we are getting to the end, but I'll also allow you to you know, I've been speculating a lot about, you know, both in this discussion and some of the technologies we have heard about here, and also some of the impressions that I'm getting from now being on the Horn of Africa and East Africa, and with the really, really dry regions that we have here, the groundwater, the huge, like 60% groundwater dependency that we have in many of these areas, and also, you know, big coastal cities and many of the groundwater aquifers actually being brackish and you know, going to being salty. What's the World Bank's take on you know, technology development? I could see a huge demand for cheap desal solutions looking forward in both the medium to the long term scenario with climate impact, etc. What's your approach to identifying solutions like that? Diego, please.
No, Jorgen, yeah, I agree with your statement. Now we have very large sort of programs and investment programs in the driest countries here, including a huge groundwater program in the Horn of Africa, and precisely the challenge becomes one on the selection of appropriate technologies that can be sustained in the long run as well, right? Because we have in many instances the push for quite expensive technologies that require a lot of on-the-ground technical capacities that are not necessarily there. And then at the same time, we need to think of how do you operate and maintain those systems in the medium and long term. And sometimes what you see is that you have some bilateral support or some grant support initially for some, you know, to subsidize some capex or test some of the technologies. But then the key question becomes, how do you keep that technology running in an area, you know, with where the institutional capacity is not very strong, and the financing is very critical. No, there is maybe no cost recovery from the utility that will be enough to operate and maintain those systems. So we spend a lot of time in identifying those sort of lower cost solutions that will not also, whether it's a water user associations or utilities, that does not affect their balance sheet that strongly, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Diego. And I think time is up, folks. And I think, you know, coming from the very first discussions with Gabriel from the San Diego Water Technology Alliance about, you know, making an event like this, you know, speculating about the relevance, I think the discussion today has definitely underlined that there is a relevance. I think we have identified that there are dire needs for knowledge exchange between dry regions, but I think we have also identified that there are very, very strong institutions the Arizona State University, people like Jay and Paul, and that are developing really strong science and strong solutions, and also have an interest in sharing and cooperating in disseminating these solutions. We also have private sector companies like Isle Utilities that are providing modalities that can take these new innovations, these technologies and solutions, out of the universities, out of the centers of excellence, and get them out there working where they're mostly needed. And also we have the big multilaterals with the big muscles, and also of course, you know, the smaller countries like Denmark with their bilateral programs that are willing to go out there and try to facilitate all this. Because, and you know, one of the things that I've heard, you know, since I came up to here is that you know, water will become a commodity. Yeah, it will become a commodity. We have the first official request from states in the Middle East to Ethiopia, actually to extract water from the Awas River and export it to states in very dry areas in the Middle East and the Arabian countries. It's happening right now. We have Egyptians that are buying up big plots of land in the Nile Delta in South Sudan, and they are doing that within the prospect of exporting water. Water will become a commodity. It's the next oil, and you know, with climate change and the changes we see, etc., technologies and knowledge exchange like these events will be needed also in the future. I don't know whether this seminar will be the first in a series. Of course, Gabriel and I, and also the representatives from the Danish WTA will have to evaluate. But, you know, this discussion is not ending here. We need events like this. We need to have knowledge sharing. And then again, I've looked at the participants we've had. More or less consistently 25 participants all the way through. I've seen participants from North America. I've seen participants from Southern Africa. I've seen participants from East Africa. I also see some names that I really can't interpret. We have participants from Denmark, definitely. And I also think at some point saw a name that could be Asian. So I think actually we have met, although with a fairly limited participation, the goal of having participants from at least four different continents. So colleagues, thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you so much for spending your time on this. Let's get it out there. Let's get it working where it's needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.